How does Woody Johnson sell his vacant head coaching job and soon to be vacant general manager job to the top candidates? It won't be easy, but there are some things he can do, and we'll discuss them today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, October 30th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, today we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Let's begin. And our first question, John, you're Woody Johnson. How do you sell the potential head coach and general manager positions to the top candidates so we don't end up with just anyone? This question almost feels like an insult because it says I'm Woody Johnson, but it's not going to be easy. And I think the biggest challenge the Jets face is, in fact, that Woody Johnson is their owner, because most of these candidates, the head coaching candidates and the general manager candidates, the things that they're most focused on, their number one priority is making sure they get a good owner. You know, it's not the salary cap situation. It's not the roster situation. And the reason it's not any of these things is that a new general manager candidate, going in that typically it's not the good teams that need a new general manager, and the head coaching candidates, you go in knowing it's not a good team that needs a head coach. Occasionally there's a good coach that resigns or retires or something like that from one of the top teams, but most of the time the reason there's a job opening is that the team is bad, and it's you have confidence in your ability to fix things. If you're a general manager and the salary cap situation is bad, your job's, you say, okay, well, my job's to clean it up. If you're a head coach and the team's bad, my job's to develop more talent, to instill a better culture in the team. The thing that you need to do those things, though, is have a quality owner, because you can't do these things if the owner's going to constantly meddle, if the owner's going to constantly get in the way, or if the owner's not going to give you time to make the moves you need to make. And Woody Johnson has now established himself as one of the worst owners in the sport, maybe the worst owner in the sport. I mean, you could argue the guy in Carolina, maybe you could argue the guy in Cleveland, but Woody Johnson's as bad as it comes. And the other problem with Woody is that, he's owned the team now for about 25 years. So there's now a decent alumni base from the Jets. There are guys who have coached this team who are now working with other teams in the league. There are guys who have been general managers who have, reached out to their contacts, and they all have nothing but bad things to say about Woody. He's impulsive. He takes control when he shouldn't take control. They make some very odd decisions. I mean, within the last 5 years, the Jets have fired a general manager after the draft. Now they've fired a head coach after 5 games, both of which came shortly after ownership gave these guys votes of confidence. And the problem with that is people say, well, Mike Maccagnan was awful. And I know Mike Maccagnan was awful. I talked a lot on the show about why Mike Maccagnan was awful. I know Robert Salah wasn't a good coach, but you want some predictability from your owner. You don't want to hear like one day that he's invested in the plan and the next you're fired. So this is a huge challenge the Jets face. And there is a roadmap. There is a blueprint to landing a top candidate in a situation like this. Now, the first thing is Woody Johnson needs to promise he's going to step back. Woody Johnson needs to be self-reflective and understand the mistakes he's made along the way. And there have been so many mistakes over the last 25 years and over the last 2 years. He's made every wrong decision. And he needs to understand that, he's the biggest problem with this team right now. You can't keep blaming the players. You can't keep blaming the coaches. You can't keep blaming the front office. In the last 14 years, and this will now be a 14-year playoff drought with no end in sight, the only thing that's been constant is the Johnson family ownership. Everything else has changed. And so it's either the Jets are the team with the worst luck in the world, or something's wrong with ownership. And I think it's clear something is wrong with ownership. So he needs to promise these guys. And the problem is, like, if I'm a new head coach or a new general manager, I'm not going to believe him, because even if you mean that today, you're going to change your mind, because you've shown in the past that you'll step in the first sign you don't like what's going on, and you don't know when to step in. So the way to work around that is the blueprint's pretty clear. he's going to have to give these guys at least, he's going to have to give the new coach and the new general manager at least a 6-year contract. A lot of these contracts, when they start out, they're maybe 4 or 5 years. These guys will require a 6-year contract. And this blueprints, but there are two very specific examples of when this has happened. One was with the San Francisco 49ers when they hired Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. And very easy to forget because the 49ers are now on the top of the league. But Jed York, their owner, looked very much like Woody Johnson at that point. The 49ers had gone through 3 coaches in 3 years. They had driven Jim Harbaugh, a very successful coach, out of the organization in that time. And the 49ers were a mess. They were completely dysfunctional. They had back-to-back coaches who got fired after 1 year, Jim Tomsula and then Chip Kelly. And the fact they went to Chip Kelly after his Philadelphia experience spoke volumes about the state of that San Francisco franchise at that point. So the only way they could land guys was to get 6-year contracts because, even if like you can't guarantee the owner's not going to meddle, with a 6-year contract, you can just say, dude, get out of here. And the owner can't, if the owner fires you, then you can go on vacation for the next 5 years. The other instance where this happened was with the Jets, back in 2019 when Chris Johnson impulsively fired Mike Maccagnan after the draft when he should have done it before the draft and essentially let Mike Maccagnan build the roster for the next 2 seasons. And the Jets went out and got Joe Douglas. And for all of Joe Douglas's failures, and we now know that Joe Douglas is not a great GM, but at the time, Joe Douglas was a very heavily coveted candidate. And the way the Jets were able to reel him in was by giving him a 6-year contract, which gave him time to build, gave him time to work through, to try and wade through the dysfunction, to try and fix things. Now, obviously, Douglas was not as successful as we would have liked him to have been. But to land a candidate of that caliber, that's what it's going to take. What he's going to have to just look, I don't know if he'll do it. The problem with the Jets right now is that if you're not willing to do that, you're going to have to do something extraordinary to land a top candidate. And he's going to have to make promises which they won't believe. He'll have to give him that contract, or they'll have to give him the big contract. The only two other options are, one, you could try and find the next hot guy before anybody realizes he's the hot guy, and maybe that's a position coach somewhere who hasn't been a coordinator who could be the next great head coach. And like Andy Reid, when he was hired with Philadelphia, had never called plays before. So I mean, that's I don't trust Woody Johnson to find that guy, because Woody Johnson's always outside of Adam Gase, Woody Johnson's hired exclusively first-time head coaches, has shown no talent for scouting quality head coaching prospects. The other option would be you go out and you do what the Knicks did when they got Tom Thibodeau. Tom Thibodeau is a quality coach, but his stock was a little down. He couldn't really be as picky at that point because he had just had a really ugly tenure with the Minnesota Timberwolves. So he kind of had to go to the Knicks. The Knicks were down. Knicks were, a pretty similar place to where the Jets are right now. They were able to land a quality coach where, buy low on a quality candidate. And that might be what they do in the general manager job. I mean, there are guys available like, John Dorsey, who, was a pretty good GM with the Chiefs and the Browns, but a guy who by many accounts, difficult guy to get along with in the front office, kind of went off on his own sometimes. It wasn't a team player sometimes. So got fired from the Chiefs and got fired from the Browns. That could be a guy. There are some other guys out there. We're going to talk a lot about potential candidates in the days and weeks ahead, but it's not impossible for the Jets to find a decent candidate. It's going to be tough though. And the bigger issue for me is that, how do we know the owner's not going to screw it up anyway? How do we know we're not going to get, 2 years into the tenure and then we'll be building something decent and the owner decides to change his mind and step in? I think that's one of the bigger. I think that's as big of a challenge as finding quality candidates. Now, I had you on the Locked On Jets podcast. This is not a coping podcast, but we're going to talk coping mechanisms. This is where the owner's gotten us. We're going to talk coping mechanisms for dealing with this owner, Woody Johnson. What can fans do? I have some thoughts on that as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Built Rewards. Listen up, renters. Ever feel like you're stuck in this loop of rent payments, just watching your money vanish into thin air? It's time to turn that rent game around and start earning some serious rewards. That's where Built Rewards comes in. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent. Every month you pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. Use points to jet off to a dream vacation. Put your points toward a flight or hotel stay with 500 plus airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them toward a future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle. Pay rent hassle-free using the Built Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Built points have been consistently ranked the value point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate. Earn points by paying rent now when you join built.com/locked on. That's join built, JOINBILT.com/locked on NFL. Be sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Join built.com/locked on NFL to start earning points with your rent payments today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you every day, as this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question: Woody wants what Woody wants, and Woody does what Woody does: overspend, underdevelop, and sink our future, handing away our resources, rinse and repeat. I can't see Woody trading players away at the deadline. What do you recommend we fans actually do to force Woody to sell the entire team? Should we boo every time he comes on screen, chant at the game, sell Woody, sell? Billboards outside the stadiums, planes with banners over practice, calling into all local, national radio, TV, podcasts, papers, demanding Woody sell the team. And you can get beat writers, interviewers to question him repeatedly and direct the sentiment from fans that it is time to move on. And I talked a lot about this on the show I did yesterday. I did 2 episodes. One of the main one was about Woody Johnson and what we can do. And the answer is, I feel like we all have to find our own way to do it. I'll use this podcast to try and do whatever I can to try and raise awareness of how bad Woody is and try and raise the pressure on him. There's only so much I can do with this podcast, though. As a fan, do what you can, do whatever you think is possible. Within reason. I don't know. I don't know that those airplane things really make a difference. That's been a go-to move from Jets fans. The airplanes with the banners. I mean, I don't know if those make a difference, but it's up to you. I said this on yesterday's show that, if you feel like not spending your money on this team will do something, then do that. But I don't want to tell people how to spend their own money, because it's your money. It's your hard-earned cash. You can do what you want with it. And, there are some people who, it's a family bonding experience to go to a Jets game, or, when the team is bad, the tickets are usually pretty low priced. And the tickets are normally ridiculously expensive. I mean, you have to take out a mortgage to go to these games. So it's not, if it's an opportunity to go to a game and you like going to games, I can't tell you don't do that, but find your own way to deal with it. Find your own way to raise pressure with it. Find ways to express your dissatisfaction. If that's calling into talk radio, call into talk radio. I think there's no one answer, because you can't force the guy to sell the team. At the end of the day, there's nothing a fan can. I think it's unfortunate, and I think it creates a really bad incentive structure, because there's nothing, the owners are not held accountable for their performance. The NFL, owning a team is a license to print money, because you get all this money from this big TV deal. So you could run a team as poorly as Woody Johnson's run a team and still make a lot of money. If the Jets, if a real business was run like the Jets, they would have gone out of business years and years ago. If you run an actual business where you have to you have to do smart things to make a profit, Jets would never survive in the real world. But that's Woody Johnson. He's not he's not a great businessman. He's not a great owner. He just, kind of lucked into owning the Jets, and we all pay the consequences for that. Hopefully he gets the message. I think we have to raise pressure whatever way we can. Next question is from Drew. John, I absolutely despise Woody Johnson. Do you think the NFL should allocate TV revenue to the owners based on win percentage? I.e., the Chiefs owner would get more money from the TV deal than Woody would. Money might be the only reason that Woody will finally leave the team alone. He's never going to sell, and it might be another 10, 15 years before he sells. Any thoughts on this? I like the way the NFL functions. I think the NFL is actually pretty great, because everybody's got an equal chance. So it all, the money's for the most part. There's some things where teams keep their own money in the stadiums. The really expensive suites and stuff like that. I think the teams don't have to share that. But the NFL's designed so that everybody's got an equal shot, and it comes down to how smart you are. And that's why the Jets are in this situation. I don't think the issue with Woody is that I don't think the issue is that he's getting too much money. I think that it's just he's bad, and I think the NFL set up pretty well. And this is a credit to the really old guard of the owners in the league. Not so much anymore. The Jerry Joneses of the world have changed this, but 50, 60 years ago, the owners actually really cared about the health of the league. They cared about competitive balance. They cared about they thought about more than themselves. They thought about how do we help the league as a whole, and you had owners like Wellington Mara, you had owners like Art Rooney, guys who like were willing to sacrifice their own bottom line to make sure the league was healthy, and that created a system of revenue sharing where the Green Bay Packers get as much as the New York Giants do. And it allows those teams to be competitive. Now, I know in this situation we'd be talking about taking away money from a team from New York, but I don't know that that's going to help anything. I just think the Jets have not been run very smartly. I think that's your issue. I'm all for like revenue sharing when it helps the small market team stay competitive, when it gives everybody an equal chance. What I don't like is when like an example of something I don't like is the max contracts in the NBA. In the NBA, there's a maximum amount you can pay a player, and the system's been around for about 25 years, and it's in like its third or fourth iteration, so it's gotten super convoluted. But the reason there's a max contract in the NBA is that owners gave out stupid contracts, so it was essentially to restrain the owners from being stupid. And I'm against rules that bring the salary down for that reason. I'm for rules that restrain salaries in order to keep everybody competitive, to keep everybody on a level playing field. And that's the beauty of the NFL, is that everybody's on a level playing field. And the issue with Woody is that he's not very smart. And if you take away his TV money, I don't know that he's going to get any smarter. I think that we're to a point where this happened with the Giants. I just mentioned Wellington Mara. Well, Wellington Mara was not always a great owner. Wellington Mara had some amazing moments, but there was a stretch where the Giants were just dreadful. The Giants were just an awful, awful football team. And it was because Wellington Mara was feuding with his nephew, and they both owned 50% of the team. At that point, the NFL commissioner, Pete Rozelle, came in and said, you know what? You guys are one of our premier franchises. You're in New York City. And he forced them to change their ways. He forced them to essentially hire a GM, George Young, who ended up being the guy who hired Bill Parcells and turned the Giants around, turned the Giants back into a respected organization. I think we're to the point where if you're Roger Goodell, you can't have this team in New York, your biggest market, operate like this. I think Roger Goodell needs to step in and force changes. That's what I think needs to happen. I like the outside the box thinking. I'm not trying to be dismissive of the idea, because it's an interesting idea, but I like the way the NFL functions now in terms of the way the money's allocated. So I think it's just where the league may need to step in and say, you can't run your team like this. Like, this is ridiculous. You got to hire quality. You got to start hiring quality people and stop acting like such a fool. That's what I think needs to happen. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to coaches. Well, we could have we're going to do a Robert Salah retrospective. What did he do well? What did he do poorly? We'll talk about a couple other things as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And of course, you don't need to wait till the middle of a game. Jets-Texans, Thursday Night Football, Houston the favorite. Jets started as a 1.5-point favorite. Now we got the Texans favored by 1.5 points. The spread has moved. But if you think the Jets are going to turn it around and finally end this losing streak, FanDuel.com is the place to get in on the action. Because again, you get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch, and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question is about a guy who's no longer here anymore, Robert Salah. John, now that Robert Salah is gone, let's reflect on him. What do you think he did well? What do you think he did poorly as Jets head coach? I think that with Salah, this is my issue, and my answer is probably the same as it would have been before the season. And I was a huge Salah skeptic before the season. The problem with Salah is anything I'd say good about him, the descriptions of his good qualities are the same things I'd say about a good defensive coordinator. He built a good system, built a good infrastructure. He worked well with the front office to figure out the types of players he needed for his defense. They were pretty good developing talent on that side of the ball, especially on the defensive line. Will McDonald seems like the latest example of that. The areas where he struggled, the areas where you need a guy to be a head coach. That's the problem. Salah at this point, and that he could change. Maybe he's working with Green Bay now. He'll go back and be an assistant for a couple of years. Maybe he learns. Maybe he reflects on his mistakes. He couldn't build a staff. He really didn't have much of a conception of what he wanted to do on the other side of the ball. Even if you're a defensive guy, you have to understand what you want to do on offense. I never got the impression that he was able to. As I said, you couldn't build a staff. I mean, Nathaniel Hackett, Todd Downing, Keith Carter are your three most important offensive coaches. That's not good. Did not manage the games well. It was clear there were issues preparing. I mean, how many slow starts did they have? It was obvious there were issues during the week preparing the team. It was not a team that was always ready to play on Sunday. And then some of the stuff you read behind the scenes about the excuse making he had. I mean, there was an expose last year at the end of the year from The Athletic about how he pretty much just quit on the team. Look, you understand that when your quarterback goes down 4 plays into the season, your expectations are going to change. But as a coach, you still have to try and win games. I mean, there are teams that have won the Super Bowl with their backup quarterbacks before. And I know that like last year's Jets team was not realistic to expect to win the Super Bowl. You got to go down fighting. I don't think Salah went down fighting. And just like his overall view on the game, the comment he made before the Sunday night game against the Raiders last year, it's a race to 20. That's out of line with what we need in the modern game. Modern game, you need an explosive offense. And I get the feeling Salah viewed offense as just an impediment, something that can lose the game, something that should stay out of the way of the defense. Avoid the big mistake. And you need to score in this league. So I think Salah is like the coach who fits the quintessential bad head coach, good coordinator category. And maybe in the future he'll be better, but certainly not right now. Next question from Taylor. John, when do we need to start worrying about Malachi Corley being a Denzel Mims level bust? I totally bought the hype when the team sold me about Corley being our Deebo Samuel, and halfway through the season, he's not even suiting up for games. Is this another draft debacle by this regime? I think it's too early to say that, but there's a lot of question marks I have about what the Jets did here with Malachi Corley. And this is not a second guess. The Deebo Samuel comparison was always a bad one to me because Deebo Samuel is this unique player who gets used these unique ways, and that's because Kyle Shanahan's his head coach. But if Deebo Samuel was on another team, he'd still be a really good wide receiver. And when Deebo Samuel was drafted, he was one of the best route runners in his class. Like he would succeed as a conventional receiver, even if Kyle Shanahan wasn't his coach using him in all these different ways. He's a guy who has the skill set to play wide receiver effectively in a very conventional way. He's just used in different ways because he's got a unique skill set and he's got a creative coach. Malachi Corley is not like Deebo Samuel. Malachi Corley is essentially a running back. When the Jets drafted him, I thought they should move him to running back. I barely ran. I mean, he was pretty much a guy. He was the Yak King because the reason it was the Yak King is because he caught nothing but screen passes in college. Very, very rudimentary route, even by the standards of like a college receiver coming out of one of those systems, one of those spread systems. Very limited route tree. Essentially needs to learn everything about technique at the receiver position. A total project. I'm not ready to declare it a disaster yet because occasionally some of these guys develop, but this isn't a second guess. I mean, these are things I remember I said after the draft that, expectations really need to be limited for him. And I don't think the Jets did him any favors by the way they hyped him up. My concern is that this looks like the classic Joe Douglas move where Joe Douglas overestimates his own scouting acumen. Joe Douglas overestimates his own ability to find a draft steal because the Jets were apparently trying to trade up in the second round for him. And they just apparently had him rated as their number 4 wide receiver on their board. And, you think about some of the other guys who were drafted this year. Is Malachi Corley better than them? It feels like Joe Douglas, and this is an issue with Joe Douglas. He just falls in love with certain prospects and doesn't let the draft board come to him. He just decides he knows better than everybody, that he's found this steal that nobody else can find, and he has to trade up for him. And this is what happens when it works this way. This is what happens when you approach the draft that way. I think that Corley's got a really long road to go. I don't like his odds, but I would have told you that during draft day. I think the Jets just really overestimated what this kid could do. I mean, when the Jets picked him, they always show you the videos. They have that ridiculous One Jets Drive series, which I always say is like the state-run media, the Jets propaganda, because they always frame it so like they make the Jets look like geniuses, especially in the draft room. And I was hoping that like when they spoke with Malachi Corley, there would be something about, Jeff Ulbrich coached him at the Senior Bowl this last year. So I was hoping there's be something like, he really took to receiving. He didn't run a lot of routes in college, but when we ran it, when we gave him the full route tree in college, he really took to it. He really was a quick learner. I was hoping to hear something like that. Instead, it was like, this guy's a beast. Look at him run over guys. And like, that's not going to translate to the NFL. You got to be able to run routes in this league. So look, I'm not ready to throw in the towel yet, but my opinion on him hasn't really changed. That it's going to be a tough one. He's a major project, and The Jets didn't realize he was a major project. They should have, because this is not Deebo Samuel, and I don't know any other way to put it. Next question. Would you say the Jets are me guys and independent contractors worried about the game check rather than winning? I'd say that about Reddick. I think that's pretty clear. I don't know that I'd go that far with everyone else. Trying to be fair about this, because I'm not there every day. I don't see what's happening. I do think there are cultural issues with the Jets, though. I do get the sense that this is not a cohesive team. It troubles me that, you bring in a guy who quit on his team with the Raiders in Las Vegas, and Devontae Adams. It is, again, like, not a guy who's like, you're the ultimate leader. This is not Ray Lewis you're bringing in, who's like or Tom Brady, who, they run a locker room. This is a guy who quit on his old team and comes in and says, he's really alarmed by the culture, really, really alarmed by seeing the way the sideline reacts to things. There's clearly a lack of leadership on this team right now. I mean, I think even from the outside, you can tell that. There are issues. I think we can leave it at that. I mean, I don't know that I want to say that it's all independent contractors who don't care, but they obviously brought in a lot of guys from other teams. They obviously brought in a lot of big name guys near the end of their careers who are collecting big money and not producing like it. And clearly there are cultural issues on this team. So, I mean, I think that much is clear. Our next question: why does God hate the Jets? I keep hearing this question about cursing, are the Jets cursed? The thing with the Jets is, like, they take like all the worst practices in the NFL. They take like all the team building philosophies that are proven to be the worst ideas possible and use them. And they do the opposite of everything the good franchises do, and then act shocked when the results are bad. The curse might be that we ended up with Woody Johnson as our owner. But everything after that is just bad management. I mean, yeah, of course, there's bad luck. There have been some injuries, the Rodgers injury. You could go back through the years, but this is far less about the Jets being cursed or the Jets having bad luck as it is the Jets just making a lot of really bad decisions and running themselves in a way that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the last question: what are your thoughts on Rex potentially coming back as head coach? So I did a special bonus episode on this yesterday, so you can get my full thoughts on that. But in brief, I understand why fans adore Rex Ryan, because of those first 2 years were really special. I don't think Rex is the right coach for this team now. I think his last 6 years as a head coach, 4 with the Jets, 2 with Buffalo, exposed some pretty deep flaws about Rex. And those flaws are the exact opposite of what you want in a head coach for the Jets. You want a guy who can build a team with young players. You want a guy who can instill discipline. You want a guy who knows how to build an offense. You want a guy who has a plan to develop a quarterback. Rex is not good in any of these areas. I think the reason Rex was good in the 2009-2010 timeframe is that he inherited a veteran team, and he was the perfect guy for that team. A lot of guys who didn't need a lot of supervision, a lot of guys who would do the work on their own. And Rex is a guy who he trusts his guys. He doesn't really bring the hammer down. He's not a disciplinarian. And that was perfect for that team. And then once that veteran leadership started to leave, they needed the coaches to fill the gap, and Rex isn't really that kind of guy. So I don't think Rex is the right guy for this team. And I know he's popular. I understand why he's popular. Like, I'll always have fond memories of those first 2 years. But I think the other thing is Rex has been out of the league a long time. The league's changed a lot since the last time Rex coached, and he'd be playing catch up. And look, Rex is Rex. I think one thing that's clear about Rex is that he's not going to change his ways. There are coaches where you see maybe this guy's learned from his experiences. I think we know Rex is just going to be Rex no matter what. And to succeed in the modern NFL, he would need to change. So I just don't think he's the right coach for this team. And you can go back. I did a special episode on this yesterday afternoon. I called it the worst idea of the year. And that's not to, I don't want to be disrespectful to the job Rex did during those first 2 years, because I know he does have a special place in franchise history. But I do think it's the worst idea of the year to bring back Rex Ryan for the Jets. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast for us, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.